Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Spider-Man Brand New Day Movie Marathon and part of the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the releases of Spider-Man Brand New Day in July 2026 and Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today, we are discussing Captain America Civil War. Released in 2016 and directed by Joe and Anthony Russo, this is the third Captain America movie, but it essentially serves as the Avengers 2.5. Overall, I love this movie a lot. Not only does it serve as a great story for Captain America's third adventure, it also splits the Avengers in half and causes them to duke it out in spectacular fashion, but it really does stay as a Captain America movie at heart. This is my second favorite movie in all of the MCU. Number 1 and number 3 haven't been listed in our movie marathon yet, so we'll get to those when we get to those. But Captain America Civil War is my number 2. For positives, I would mention the visual effects, the score by Henry Jackman, the balance of all of the characters in this movie. As I said, it's kind of Avengers 2.5 and it has a lot of Avengers in it. We get to see a lot more from the Vision, who had just recently been created in Age of Ultron, Ant-Man going giant for the first time, and a fabulous introduction to Black Panther and Spider-Man. I like the two sides of the argument and how it comes together, especially culminating in the airport battle scene. But then I also love the final conflict and how that all plays out with Iron Man and Captain America with Bucky right in the middle. And then the final positive is just Steve's story staying at the center of Civil War. And for negatives, I just have one. Rhodey suffers an accident, and he's just fine afterwards. And I just don't love that. Spoiler alert for Captain America Civil War. So the visual effects in this movie are very well done. With all of these Avengers and all of these superpowers, you would expect this to be a very special effects heavy movie, and it is. We get lots of Wanda's powers and Vision's powers, lots of Iron Man suits with visual effects that go into those. And then Giant Man going huge and Ant-Man going small. There's just a lot of visual effects throughout this whole movie, and there weren't any parts that stood out as being poorly done. It all just seems seamless, and what's always impressive about these Avengers movies is the costumes that are all created by different directors and costume designers for their individual movies, and then they come together in a team up, and the color palette still works. I know that's part of the whole machine of the MCU, but it still is impressive when you get these team members to line up and they look like they live in the same universe, and the color palette does a lot of that. So I think the visual effects in this movie are spectacular. The score by Henry Jackman is also very good. Henry had done some scores in the MCU before this, but I think this one is really great, especially in the airport battle scene where the music reaches a crescendo and it's very memorable, but also there's a lot of points in this score that are a complement to what's happening on screen, and I think that's essentially what the point of a score is most of the time. So I think this one really stands out as a great score. Next is the balance of characters. And I love how in Captain America Civil War we are introduced to the Sokovia Accords, which the United Nations had agreed upon, sort of a mandate for the Avengers to exist, but only under the control of the United Nations, and how that idea splits our team in half. And I think that every character has a time to share their opinion, and it makes sense why they're on either Tony Stark's side, played by Robert Downey Jr., or Steve Rogers' side, played by Chris Evans. And I think there's a really good balance there. As I mentioned before, in this movie we get to see more from Vision. He was created in the Avengers Age of Ultron, and here he's portrayed by Paul Bettany, but we finally get to see him. This is really his first time being a character in this movie, and we get to see more from his powers. There's a really cool visual effect that happens quickly, and if you're not watching for it, you miss it. But when Hawkeye, played by Jeremy Renner, breaks out Wanda from her confinement by the Vision, played by Elizabeth Olsen, Hawkeye's trying to fight Vision, and so he tries to swipe at him, and he phases right through. and then he hits him with his stick a bunch, and you can see Vision's face harden, and the visual effects they chose to me looks like crystal. He kind of crystallizes, and you can see that the stick breaks on him. But if you're not watching closely, you kind of miss that. But it just shows this density power that Vision has that nobody else in the MCU has. So it's cool that we get to see a lot more from him. And then Ant-Man comes into play here. This is his first Avengers movie. He's played by Paul Rudd, and he does his little Ant-Man thing, and he's lots of fun, breaking into Tony's suit and messing up stuff in there. But then he turns his suit up to giant and becomes huge, and that was a show-stopping moment in the movie. I really like the effect of how he moves sort of slowly, but it's because he's so huge, and really he is moving quickly. It just covers a lot of area. So that's a great point when he goes giant. It's a bit of a shame that that moment wasn't saved for the Ant-Man sequel, but I still think it made sense to be used in this movie, so that works. And then we get two fabulous introductions to Marvel Comics staples that are introduced for the first time in the MCU. The first is Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman, and I love the suit that he wears in this one. In the Black Panther solo movie, they changed the suit, and I don't like it as much. This one, I think, is the best Black Panther suit. But he's introduced as the Prince of Wakanda, and then we kind of see the tragedy that befalls his father. So then he kind of has to deal with that grief and his anger, and he focuses all that on Bucky, played by Sebastian Stan. But then he kind of goes through some character growth. And it's insane that in such a packed movie, you have a character introduction who goes through character growth, but Black Panther really does, and it's a great introduction to him. And then we also get introduced to the MCU version of Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland. And I really like him in his little scene with Aunt May, with Marisa Tomei, and then his kind of mentor-mentee relationship with Tony Stark that begins here. I do like that for this movie. And then when he swings into the fight and joins in the fray, I think it's a great and unique character to add to the MCU because he's clearly a teenager amongst all these adults. And I just think the balance of all these characters and introductions and points of view are balanced incredibly well in Captain America Civil War. So that's certainly a huge positive for this movie. Next, I love the final conflict of this movie. Throughout the whole movie, the Avengers are split on the Sokovia Accords, and that makes sense and it works. And as they progress through, we get introduced to a villain, Baron Zemo, played by Daniel Bruhl, who I actually think is a great villain. He's not as flashy or as showy as other villains in the MCU, so he's not always put into that category of great MCU villains. But really, what he does is he discovers a secret, and throughout the movie we see him pursuing this secret, but as the audience we don't know what it is. But he's after something with this red book, and then setting up, the psychiatrist and posing as a psychiatrist and using these keywords on Bucky and knowing about these other Winter Soldiers, and then the revelation that he's not the only Winter Soldier. So then they go to stop this Baron Zemo from bringing back the other Winter Soldiers, which would just be terrible. So then as the audience, we're thinking, okay, that's what we're building up to. But really, it's the discovery of a secret that Bucky was behind the death of Tony Stark's parents. So Zemo knows that, and as the audience, we don't know that. And they're giving us hints throughout the movie with some of that flashback footage and the security camera footage. But when they finally meet up in that bunker in Siberia is when we as the audience are shown what happened. That Bucky, as the Winter Soldier on assignment, was the one who took out Tony's parents. And Tony sees that and reacts to it in real time. I mean, it's a movie, but reacts to it in real time. And we see on Robert Downey Jr.'s face some incredible acting as he responds to that. And then he asks the million-dollar question to Steve, did you know? And Steve did know all this time that Bucky was behind it. And I think setting up that whole conflict where the whole movie we're thinking about it's about the Sokovia Accords, and then it turns into this unbearable secret that Bucky has carried for all this time, but at some point Steve also figured out and chose to not tell Tony. And then we have the iconic battle between Iron Man and Captain America with Bucky in the middle, and how their vengeance is consuming them, as Black Panther says to Zemo at the end of the movie. It's just so brilliantly done. The plot of this movie is very busy, but it's executed so perfectly that the Russo brothers took the concept of the Civil War from the comic books, which I've read, and this is a very loose adaptation of it. They've taken quite a few liberties to make it fit the MCU. But I think this story fits so perfectly into the mythos that's been established and execute it at a level of almost perfection that I think is really beautiful. And that's why it's my number 2 movie. And we still haven't even reached the strongest positive. And then the strongest positive is, I think, even with all this Avengers stuff going on, this movie is a Captain America story at its heart. And in Captain America, the first Avenger, we see his origin and his friendship with Bucky, and then Bucky gets lost. And Captain America kind of becomes who we already knew he was in his heart. And then in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Bucky comes back, and Steve becomes sort of disillusioned with modern espionage, being part of S.H.I.E.L.D., where S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Project Oversight was going to neutralize threats before they happen, and he's not comfortable with that. He's always had this moral compass that's being tested by his role as an Avenger and the leader of the Avengers as Captain America. Here in Captain America Civil War, the Sokovia Accords are put in front of him, and he feels like he's got this humanity where he understands what the Avengers stand for and what they need to do. But if a committee of United Nations specialists decides where they can go and where they can't go, he just knows he can't stand behind that. So then, true to his character, he goes against the law because he knows this is not right. He doesn't really have another solution other than we need to resist this, because in the second movie, he was pushing against fear in the name of freedom. And so in an extension of that, the Sokovia Accords are going to, relieve some fear of the public because the Avengers have caused such destruction in their world-saving efforts, but he knows that they're doing the right thing, so they need to have the freedom at the expense of the public's fear. And then Peggy Carter passes away, and she's been a mainstay throughout a lot of these movies, even some flashbacks in some Avengers movies. And so he attends her funeral. Even in the midst of all these other things going on, he needs to be there for Peggy's funeral. And then we learn that Sharon Carter, played by Emily Van Camp, is Peggy's niece, and he has this little romance with her, which I don't think totally works. And in the funeral, Sharon says the line from the comic books that in the comics was actually Steve who says it, but the line about, even if everybody's doing the wrong thing, you plant yourself by the river of truth like a tree, and you say, no, you move. And that's right from the comics, and I think it's adapted in a beautiful way. And then we get, throughout all this fighting, and Steve is just trying to protect his friend. And it is kind of a misguided virtue that he wants to protect Bucky, but he knows that Bucky has done terrible things, albeit not under his own control and his own will, but he's still done terrible things, even to some of his closest friends like Tony Stark. And so Steve Rogers stays at the heart of this movie. And I think it's just so strong. It could have been easily swallowed up in all the Avenger-ness of the movie, but I think the Russo brothers and even the writers, Marcus and McFeely, did a great job keeping it centered on Steve Rogers as our kind of emotional heart to the whole story. And then for negatives, I did mention that Sharon Carter's romance subplot with Steve Rogers isn't super strong, but it kind of serves the story a little bit, I guess, and a comedic relief when he kisses her and Falcon, played by Anthony Mackie, and Bucky are watching, and they kind of grin at him like his bros. But the other main negative is right at the culmination of the airport battle, Vision tries to stop Falcon from chasing War Machine, and he blasts him with a beam, which Falcon dodges, and then it hits, I guess, the arc reactor in War Machine's armor. So he falls out of the sky, and he falls from a very, very high height, and I think reaches terminal velocity and slams into the ground before Iron Man or Falcon can get to him to slow his fall. And he hits the ground and impacts the ground in a huge crater. And I'm no physicist, but I feel like if you were to fall from that height outside of a metal can, you would be in a lot of trouble. But I think falling inside of a heavy metal suit would be worse, wouldn't it? But yet he still falls and slams into the ground. It looks like we don't know if he's okay. And then Tony reads that he's got some vital signs, and then he gets recuperated, and his spine has been broken in a bunch of places. But then he walks again. And not to spoil too much of the future, but like he walks again and is War Machine again later in the MCU. So I just feel like if you're going to give us consequences, give us consequences, but I feel like they didn't execute that. Because this is part of the Spider-Man Brand New Day movie marathon, let's take a minute to talk about the suit. This is the first version of the Tom Holland Spider-Man suit, and this one was designed and given to him by Tony Stark. We do see some YouTube footage of Peter's original suit, which has red and blue as a color scheme, and it has the black goggles with white eyes. That was homemade. So then Tony Stark gives him an upgrade and a new suit. I don't hate this suit. It's not as terrible as the one in The Amazing Spider-Man 1, but I really don't love this suit. I especially don't love the idea that Tony Stark made it, and it doesn't really make sense to me that he would be given a suit that's full of tech but is still spandex. It kind of introduces the plot hole that if Iron Man can make suits of armor for people like James Rhodes, who doesn't have an arc reactor in his chest, why doesn't he make Iron Man suits or Iron Man or versions of Iron Man suits for everybody in the Avengers team with all this weaponry and protection? It doesn't really make sense. But anyways, Tony Stark creates this Spider-Man suit. So it's a little bit weird to me. It has a shimmery fabric in some of the close-ups that has some visual distinction, but I don't love that. And then the lines are doubled if you look closely, which is unique. But I also don't love, there's a lot of extra black kind of rubber design features that break up the sight lines. I think the silhouette of the Spider-Man suit is one of the best ones in all of comics, and this breaks it up in a lot of spots, on the shoulders, on the wrists, on the arms, on the knees, on the belt. And I just don't love how the black rubber parts break up the sight lines. I do like the logo. It's a very small spider logo, and the legs look like, to me, the lines on a motherboard, like an electrical current type thing, and I think that's pretty cool. And I do really love the eyes, that they get bigger and smaller, sort of like the aperture of a camera, which is a nice homage to Peter being a photographer in the comics. So I do like the eyes. And in the comics, Spider-Man's eye shape have gone through a lot of variations. And so this allows them to have sort of some expression in the eyes, which I think is really nice. So this suit isn't terrible, but I especially don't love the black leather parts and some of the double lining. And then the shimmeriness and the spandexiness of the, it's not even spandex. It also feels like a sock, like a fabric more than a spandex, which I don't like. So it's not my favorite suit, but it's not the worst one or the best one. Now, how might Captain America Civil War connect to Spider-Man Brand New Day? Well, of course, this movie served as the introduction to Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, and of course, that is the version of Spider-Man that we will see in Spider-Man Brand New Day, so we will see him return. And the Hulk was referenced in Captain America Civil War, but he's not on the teams, and we don't see him at all. And he will be in Spider-Man Brand New Day, so that's a bit of a loose connection there. Otherwise, all the Avengers in this movie are not part of the cast list for Spider-Man Brand New Day, so I don't expect to see any of them. And we're not going to see Aunt May or any of the other kind of Spider-Man supporting characters from other future movies because they haven't been introduced yet. So other than Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the reference of Hulk that will be in Brand New Day, there won't be much connection there. Now, how might Captain America Civil War connect to Avengers Doomsday? Well, Joe and Anthony Russo, who directed this movie, will direct Doomsday. And Chris Evans will return as Steve Rogers' Captain America somehow. We're not really sure how at this point. Anthony Mackie will return as the new version of Captain America. Sebastian Stan will play Bucky, although he's now a member of the Thunderbolts. And Paul Rudd is on the cast list to return as Scott Lang and Ant-Man. Robert Downey Jr. will be in Avengers Doomsday, but not as Tony Stark. He will be Doctor Doom and Victor Von Doom somehow. And then not on the cast list, but who could make an appearance are Hawkeye, Rhodes, Spider-Man, Sharon Carter, and Thunderbolt Ross, although he's now played by Harrison Ford. But none of those characters are confirmed for Doomsday, so it would be a surprise. I really do expect Spider-Man to appear, though. So that's my review of Captain America Civil War. What do you think of this movie, and how do you think it might connect to Avengers Doomsday or Spider-Man Brand New Day? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd, where you can see all of the movie marathons we've got going on right now. The next movie in this marathon is Spider-Man Homecoming. See you at the movies!